All right, everybody, welcome to Deals and Deadlines, your sports business podcast with Hadley Engelhardt. I'm Matt Chernoff. Thank you so much for finding us and being a part of our little podcast family. We have new episodes that drop here each and every Friday. And remember, you can watch this extravaganza on the 680 The Fan YouTube channel. All right, Hadley, this drops Friday, the day after the first round of the NFL draft. So I want to pick your brain about the whole draft experience because you've represented a lot of players who've been drafted first round, second round, all the way through the end of the draft.
I've even had 12th round. That tells you how long I've been in the business.
I didn't remember a 12th round. How about that?
Jeff
Okay.
Parker out of Bethune-Cookman College.
That's funny. That's very funny. So let me ask you this. In the days leading up to the draft, after all the haze in the barn, right? You've done all the workouts and you've had all the interviews. Are you becoming more of a life coach as much as an agent trying to kind of reel in expectations and make sure, because they're hearing everything. They got their cousin and brother going, you're going to be a first round pick. So are you trying to manage expectations?
Most definitely. In fact, on my way to the studio today, I was on the phone with a client of ours talking about the draft, what to expect, what not to expect. He was talking about how long the last few weeks have been. And I explained to him, they've been long. These next few days are going to be longer. And this weekend is going to seem like an eternity. It's just the unknown, not knowing where you're going to go, how high you're going to go, what city are you moving to, all these different factors. And you're right, the pressure from family comes into play and friends asking questions and asking the same question. You almost want to put it out there, leave me alone and don't ask me these questions because you just don't know. There are a few players going into this, and I've had over a dozen first-round draft choices with the NFL. You know, as you go into the draft, the guys who are really projected top 10, top 15, they're going to go in the first round. So even if they drop, they're still going in the first round. It's the guys like Thursday night, this is now dropping on Friday, there will be guys there in that draft room that have first round type grades, but there's only 32 picks in the first round. And so what ends up happening is guys who have first round grades drop to the second round, guys that have second round grades drop to the third round, and there's a domino effect. So it is definitely playing life coach at this point. During the draft, you know, there's some things that can happen, and we're going to have as a guest Blake Bedingfield on in one of the segments coming up, who's the former director of college scouting with the Titans, and he'll talk about it, and I'll share just what goes on with more of the mental side of it. You know, all the testing's done. Mm-hmm. Now it's all the expectations and management.
So talk to me about the actual procedural part, because we watch the draft and we see a player pick up the phone. Right, it's the call from the team. That happens in the first round. There's a bit of TV magic that they want for that. Throughout the rest of the draft, does it happen the same way? Do you get a text from the team? Are you informed by the player after he gets the call? What's the whole order of how it plays out?
All the above.
Yeah.
I mean, it all depends on your relationship with the team, with the GM, the chief negotiator. There may be a trade happening. They may want to know what's going on. So you're having dialogue throughout the draft, and more times than not, as they're calling the player or before they call the player, you're getting a call or a text from one of the GMs or assistant GMs kind of going over, hey, it looks like if your player's available in 2 picks, we're going to do it. The other thing that the viewers need to know is that everything you see on TV is delayed significantly by several picks as you get into the latter rounds. So we are way ahead of what's going on and know what's going on way before the TV shows what's happening. So there is that time difference, but it's a management and expectations, and it is exciting whether you have the first pick in the draft or you picked in the 7th round. It's exciting to help these young men, forge their next chapter of their football life.
Let's talk about the business that is the draft for the league. It's become another one of these 3-day TV content inventory. Now on site, sort of, it looks big. We've done it in Vegas and we've done it in Nashville, and now we're doing it in
Nashville, and now
Green Bay. But it shows you there's a kind of an idea, though, that the NFL, little market, big market, it's all kind of the same to them. So the NFL will be in Green Bay, as we said. You're watching it right now over the couple of days in Wisconsin. It's in Pittsburgh next year. Then the bidders for the future drafts look like this. Washington, D.C.'s got a bid for 2027. Denver's bidding for that draft and for 28. Buffalo's expressed interest for 28 and 29. Again, it's become sort of it's not the Super Bowl, but it's a calendar on the event. Circle it. We'll have a big audience there live. It'll be made for TV fun, but it's also big business for the league.
Big business. In fact, when Roger Goodell decided to move it from New York, now it had been in New York every year, and I loved going there. It was an event. And the first time it was out of market, I personally questioned it. Is it going to work? And sure enough, it worked and then some. And here's the neat thing about it. You talk about cities like Green Bay and Pittsburgh. These markets will never have a Super Bowl because of the weather, where it is in January, February. So it allows them to have a marquee event for the NFL. They're going to have 25,000 people per day watching this. It is truly concerts. They make a true show out of this. And, again, it's great media. It's great marketing. But more importantly, it's bringing the NFL more money, more viewership. Owners love it.
So the other part of the draft and the buildup anyway, and again, when this drops, it's Friday, but Hadley, let's go back to the final days before the draft. It's one of my least favorite times because the lying season stuff is real, but I don't like, and this has been a thing now for a while, it's the last minute hatchet jobs on players. We've known all about where they were going to go, or at least in the ballpark of where the player was going to go, and they've done their player interviews, and we just know everything about them. In the last days, all of a sudden we start hearing things. Like I read this one a day or two ago. Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network tweeted, an NFL assistant coach talking about Shedeur Sanders said, quote, the worst formal interview I've ever been in my life. He's so entitled. He takes unnecessary sacks. He never plays on time. He's got horrible body language. He blames teammates. The biggest thing is he's not that good. Now, that could be from a team wanting to take him, who wants him to drop. That could be somebody with an axe to grind for his dad, Deion Sanders. That could be any number of things, but because it's anonymous, how would we know what's real and what's not?
And truthfully, NFL teams don't read this. They don't listen to it. And by the way, the third person in this anonymous coach and whatever he said and axe to grind is Tom Pelissero also puts it out there. We're mentioning Tom's name now 4 times.
Right.
And other media outlets are retweeting it, reposting it. And so he is building his brand. So everybody has something, in this to gain. And so at the end of the day, these teams aren't reading this stuff that someone has an issue with something else. There's so much BS out there. And Blake will talk about this because at the end of the day, if you've done your homework, you've watched your film, you've done your interviewing, everything is all set right now. All the stuff you read that came out, unless something happened that's new, someone just got arrested, right, or something failed a drug test.
There's a gas mask of a picture of a player like we saw.
Correct. I mean, if something like that happens, yes, that is relevant. No. But all this other stuff is just out there to debate and have people out there discussing it like we are.
All right, one more. And this, again, has been aggregated a few times. I never know what's real. I don't know if it's anything. So one report says as the draft was nearing this week, one rumor to watch was Falcon ownership reportedly traveled to Denver twice last week, with indications there were visits tied to Travis Hunter. They continue to write, the kind of involvement, particularly from ownership, which is uncommon for a top prospect outside their draft range, could be routine homework or worth noting nonetheless. Have you ever heard of a owner the days before, or is there anything here to anything like this in general?
Well, it used to happen back in the day before we had this hard salary cap. Because again, if you were going to take a player or potentially trade for a player, you wanted to make sure that you were within the range financially. Otherwise, you weren't going to draft that player. The fact that we have a strict salary cap, every pick has a hard number, and a first rounder is going to max out the deal. It's going to be a 4-year deal with maximum signing bonus, maximum base salary, which we call paragraph 5 salary, and all 4 years will be fully guaranteed. So there is no negotiating when it comes to that. So for them to go out there to see that, to say, hey, would you like to potentially, come to play for Atlanta? It doesn't matter.
No.
They control everything. And the fact is, it would cost Atlanta a lot of collateral, a lot of players, a lot of whatever.
Which they don't have.
To move up. And you're going to see that. And again, people are positioning it and saying stuff. And I can share stories of things that have gone on where you're on the phone with teams. And yeah, you do play that poker game with some teams as the draft goes on. Hey, what are you hearing? And we say, well, and we look at where they're picking and we look at teams that are before them or just after them and say, hey, if you don't take them, they're going to take them, and you're not going to be able to get them with your next pick. So you kind of play that. Does it work? Sometimes it does, but at the end of the day, most teams stay true to their board and pick who's the highest rated player or highest rated position player on their board.
All right, coming up, we're going to talk to Blake Bedingfield. He's the former director of scouting for the Tennessee Titans. What happens in the final days leading up to a draft? How chaotic is a war room throughout the entire process? We'll find out about that and more as Deals and Deadlines continues. All right, as we continue with this episode of Deals and Deadlines with Hadley and Matt, thanks again for making us a part of your little week, and hopefully you make it a part of every week. New episodes of Deals and Deadlines drop each and every Friday on any and every podcast platform. And remember, you can watch us on that 680 The Fan YouTube channel. All right, with all the draft stuff going on, we wanted to give you guys a little perspective from somebody who has been up close and personal working in the organization. It's in this case, the one who had the number one pick. Blake Bedingfield, kind enough to join us. He's the former director of college scouting for the Tennessee Titans, and he's going to spend some time with us on Deals and Deadlines. Blake, we appreciate the time. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to be on with you.
Well, we're glad to have you. So let's start kind of broad, and we'll kind of work our way down from there. Talk to our audience about the final days, the final hours leading up to a draft, when we think, all the information is there, you know what you're going to do. There are last-minute wrinkles and curveballs and calls that come in, but what are those final hours like leading up to the time when you're on the clock?
The last couple of days before you get into the draft room and settle in for that long marathon that you're going to have in the first round is a lot of tying up loose ends, whether it's your security department going over the last minute off the field issues that a player may have, your medical department that have some last minute information about a player and his medical issues, or things that we may be able to put a value on a player based on an injury that they have. Some of it is breaking some ties, even though it's late in the process and you're within a day before the draft. Sometimes within position groups, you're also breaking ties of a player. And then finally, and probably a very important part from a scouting perspective, is the undrafted free agent phase. Now you set your board for undrafted free agency, which will be Saturday, and you put a value on every player. Now, as you select in the first, second through seventh rounds, those values will change a little bit if you hit heavy on a certain position. But that undrafted free agency is a real important part for the scouts and director of scouting, and ultimately the general manager, but usually run by the scouting departments at that point, to finalize those 5 to 15 players that you're going to select in undrafted free agency.
Like, as you guys work toward the draft, are you doing simulated mock drafts based upon what you feel other teams may need, especially we're talking about the first round, where you kind of go through what you think will be available based upon your research and possible trades?
Absolutely. I'm speaking to agents that have players in those areas that I'm, looking to, especially when we're talking about mock drafting something. I'm talking to a lot of agents. I'm talking to actually people in the press community. I want to talk to them to see who they have contacts with and see if they can give information on the player. And then we'll go through a mock draft phase where we'll try to prepare for every situation. A player that we may feel may fall or, may not get selected because of need-based teams ahead of us that have a history of selecting need players instead of maybe the most talented. And we have to make those decisions instead of being on the clock a day or two ahead of time of, if this player falls to us, he's not a need for our team, but he would obviously be the best player on the board. Do we want him at that time? Or a player that may have the off-the-field issues, but an extremely talented player, do we select him? Let's talk about it now. Let's go through the process with everyone in the room instead of when we're on the clock. And ultimately, it depends on the organization, but you may have an owner that has a say. They now come into town. If they don't live in that town, they come into town 24 hours before the draft, and now they want to be caught up to speed on who we're going to select, and they may have their own opinions. I've been in those situations where they have, and you have to work through that as well.
Wow. Well, that's an extra layer.
All the months of research,
yes,
and all the month of data, and all the month of rehearsal. And at the last moment, ownership gets sometimes involved, and things, the course changes.
Yeah, there's a wild hair from a billionaire. So talk to me about paralysis by analysis. We've heard that term a lot. You do so many months and months and months of work on these players, and then you get to the 11th hour, and do you think sometimes you've either worked with or heard about GMs or scouting departments or front offices who talk themselves out of players at times?
Absolutely. Hadley, it's one of those things that's probably one of the more frustrating part of the process is a couple of different factors that come into play. Scouts have evaluated these players for sometimes 2 years, but at least 12 to 15 months, okay? Coaches come in the last little bit leading up to the Senior Bowl and the Combine, and they start their evaluation process of these players. So a lot shorter window than the scouts had. And the other thing that comes into play is coaches that speak to coaching friends in the college community about a player and change the trajectory of a player sometimes on the board because they have a friend that coached at a school that said X, Y, and Z about a player. Those are the frustrating things that change. The paralysis by analysis part is you have so much data on a player, whether it's speaking to them in interview settings or film work. One of the things I did as a director is I wanted to always point back to the film. Let's go back to what he looks like on film, not how he ran his last 40 or vertical at his pro day or some private workout that only a couple of people attended and the whole staff didn't attend. Let's go back to the film. Does he fit us? Can he play for us now? What's his future role in this organization? I think it's real important to go back to some of those parameters that we set early on in the scouting process, but let's redefine, or not redefine them, but let's define them again right before the draft.
So, Blake, when you're going through this whole process, and we just talked earlier on air about the news that Tom Pelissero, I don't know if you saw it, dropped that an unnamed coach started talking stuff about Sanders and some issues and some character flaws and athletic, whatever, all the flaws, and it's now out there publicly. And I expressed my thoughts on where it had value, or in my case, had no value. How much does that play into what you do? And then on top of that, agents take a lot of credit when a player gets drafted, and we positioned it and we helped him get drafted at a certain draft choice, especially in the first round, and how I believe that's nonsense because you guys are going to make decisions based upon your research and your data and your fit. Talk about those 2 points.
I think when it comes to information that comes in from the press, you always have to just take it with a grain of salt a little bit, but also look into it. So I'm going to go back to my scout that covered in that situation with Shedeur Sanders. I'm going to go back to my scout, and we're going to look over again his background. Okay, what did you find out at the school? Who were your sources? Did they have good information? Do you feel you have good information? If that's somebody that we're interested in. I'm also going to go to our regional director that had that area, our director of scouting, the multiple people that entered into that school and looked at that player and had resources in that building in the coaching department and the other people on staff there, and really dig into the background. I don't mind doing that because that's just a checks and balances. You're just making sure that you're up to speed on every player. There are players that information comes out too late. It does every year. You remember the Laramie Tunsil issue where he had the gas mask on, smoking
We talked
weed.
about it. It's so funny. That was part of, in our first segment of today's show, we discussed that.
And, you sit there and you go, okay, was that something that was known? If it is, we just kind of move on, and that was already part of the grading system anyway. So, those other things, I think that's an important part of it, just checking all the boxes.
Blake, let me ask you the other part of this, and this isn't really a scouting question. It's to Hadley's earlier question about mock drafts and trying to either guess or have an educated guess about what other teams will do. There's always a curveball. There's always a team, and like last year, an example, there was nobody, relatively speaking, that had any idea the Falcons were going to take Michael Penix, which we saw draft video inside war rooms afterwards of teams that were just legit shocked. I mean, that's got to be something that probably happens once a year where there's somebody that does something before you that throws the whole next line of picks kind of up in the air.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll even go back to my first draft, which was 1999, and we were drafted in 16 with the Tennessee Titans, and you had a good draft with Tim Couch and Donovan McNabb and Edgerton James, and the Ricky Williams trade changed the trajectory of the entire draft. And we, as a Tennessee Titans staff, wanted Javon Kearse, the defensive end, edge pass rusher from Florida, all the way up to number 5, and our GM was trying to trade up to that pick at number 5 to get Javon Kearse. But what ended up happening was that Ricky Williams trade, where they gave their entire draft for him, threw it all into flux. Some of the other really good players in that draft, Torrey Holt, Champ Bailey, they started to fall in the draft a little bit. Javon Kearse, who should have been a no doubt top 5, top 10 pick, fell to number 16, and we were able to select him, and he was Rookie of the Year. But, those type of things happen all the time where a player either gets elevated in the draft, like you mentioned, a Michael Penix, where you didn't expect him to go to the Atlanta Falcons, especially after signing Kirk Cousins in free agency. And it does change what happens after that. And that's that preparation that you do ahead of time that you can do. But there's a lot in the scouting community. The longer you're in it, and Hadley will remember the story, the longer you're in it, you will have kind of a book on scouts and how much influence they have in their own draft rooms. And I go back to the year that I was with the Titans as a director, and we selected Kevin Byard in the third round, who Hadley knows well. And in that draft, I knew the Kansas City Chiefs scout very well, and he's a good scout. And he happened to be at every workout that I was at,
and lives in Nashville.
He lives in Nashville, and every time we went to Middle Tennessee State, he was there, and I knew he liked Kevin Byard. And we loved Kevin Byard, and we had 2 third-round picks that year, one in the beginning of the third round and one at the end. Our general manager wanted to select him with the latter of the third round, but as knowing the scout with the Kansas City Chiefs and the influence that he had in his own draft room, we made the decision to take Kevin with that first third-round pick, and he ended up being a Pro Bowl, All-Pro type player. So those type things, knowing the other people in the scouting community and knowing the influence they have, can be important.
See, and I represented Kevin at that time, and I told Kevin it was all me.
Of course.
It was all Hadley.
Yeah, who didn't know that?
In a long time, and he's one of the best agents.
I say the same about my career. If it's not for Hadley, I mean, what are we going to do?
100%.
Blake, let me ask you a question. When you go into the draft, do you feel more teams, and we don't have to talk about your experiences only, I explain to listeners all the time that there are roughly like 2 boards, right? Grades by position and then overall grades, just for layman's terms. Do you feel more teams take the best player available, regardless of position, or focus specifically on a position and take the best player that fits, what they actually feel they need?
I think it's changed, Hadley. And in my time, I think when I first started, 27 years ago, it was more of draft the best player available. You had longevity in coaching. The coaching community, especially general managers, had more longevity at that point. I think it's a product of the environment that we have in the NFL now. Teams, coaches, GMs, they want players that come in and play immediately. And really, that's going to be a need-based player in a lot of situations. So they will bypass a more talented player for the long haul to get an immediate starter, let's say a left guard or a right guard or maybe a defensive tackle that they lost one in free agency and have to replace, instead of taking maybe the best player at a full position for them that could, over the long haul of his career, be a better player. They will sacrifice need. And I think the younger general managers do that, and especially general managers and coaches that are on the hot seat. They can't wait 1 or 2 years on a player. They have to have somebody that steps in week 1 and plays. Also, you see a lot of those positions that are hard to evaluate for the press and the fans, those offensive and defensive linemen. And it's easier to select those guys and plug and play them because they're a little bit harder to be criticized for if a guy's starting 17 games a year. You don't know what his statistics are because he's an offensive guard or center or maybe a tackle unless he's getting beat repeatedly. So it's easier to select those. It's a comfort. You see a lot of linemen go, which is not a bad position to pick if they're worthy of the value of the selection.
Blake, it's fascinating. It really is always to catch up, especially during this process in the draft. We appreciate you carving out some time with us, and we'll catch up with you down the road.
Anytime somebody wants to talk football, I'm available.
We love it.
Blake.
Blake, thank you. There's Blake Bedingfield, former director of scouting for the Tennessee Titans. All right, when we continue, we've got some drama around the basketball world, including a firing of a general manager that could affect his future star. We'll talk about the league hopefully ramping up in the postseason and a lawsuit that's kind of creepy. We'll do that as Deals and Deadlines continues. All right, we continue this episode of Deals and Deadlines with Hadley and Matt, your sports business podcast fun. Remember, each and every Friday, new episodes drop on any podcast platform you can always watch. And why wouldn't you want to watch on the 680 The Fan YouTube channel to see these two faces? All right, Hadley, we had a firing in the NBA this week, and it sort of caught people off guard. The Atlanta Hawks fired their general manager, Landry Fields, which a firing, not shocking, but the Hawks let him handle exit interviews. which is a kind of a big deal. You're putting together a whole strategy. Here's what you work on in the offseason. Come back, do this. Then he met with the media to talk about the grand vision for the team. Then 48 hours later, they fired him. Tell me your best guess about the timeline.
Well, first of all, I think that they knew they were going to fire him, obviously. And these exit meetings you and I could have done them. They meet collectively as an organization, discuss, all right, how did the player do? What is his future? What are his things he needs to work on? Whatever it may be. And so it's a script basically you're reading. And so for him to finish the drill, so to speak, isn't so surprising.
But why let him?
Just because the timing of it, let's finish everything. Let's finish the season. Close the chapter. We're starting a new chapter. A little surprised about the interview talking about next season. No, why would you put him in a position if you know as an owner you're about to fire him?
Yeah.
So that part of it was a little surprising. Yeah. But again, this wasn't something that happened overnight. They were always going to make a change, and so now they're going to either keep who they promoted and now bring in a director of basketball operations, which is senior to that of a general manager.
Talk to me about that process. You're an agent working with a person in that position. Maybe you're a GM somewhere else, or you're in a front office. Are you reaching out to the Hawks saying, hey, consider my client? Do you wait for the phone to ring? Do you go through a secondary channel and say, mention my guy? How does that whole thing kind of play out?
Kind of all the above. Yeah. I mean, you're hoping you've gotten a phone call from who's ever leading their search committee that says we're interested in Matt, we'll call it. And so, that's what you're hoping for. But if not, you're always out there being proactive for your clients to say, hey, are you interested? Even for the sake of to let your client know, I've reached out, in this case, to Atlanta to see if there's an interest. We'll find out. And that could be a coach. Yeah. That could be a player in any sport. We're always being proactive. The best calls are the ones that you receive. We tell that to our clients all the time. Not only does it give you a greater chance, but it also gives you more leverage because obviously there's an interest when that happens.
The other part of this that's interesting is Trae Young has 1 year left on his contract. This is now the time when we get into the summer where you start talking about extension or trades. Now, Chris Haynes reported that Trae said he wants to be here. There's never been one indication anywhere of Trae wanting to leave, but we always do the star wants to leave thing. The new GM, Onsi Sala was the assistant who has just been promoted. I wonder if he's going to lead the charge when it comes to things like that. I wonder if they're going to wait for the new president of basketball operations. But this is a key summer for the Hawks to try to figure out, is Trae going to be a part of the long term? Give him the max deal, which again, nobody can give him as much of the Hawks. And this is going to be the first responsibility of either the new GM or the new president.
Well, the new president of basketball operations will dictate the next chess move. The GM will not do it until they hire somebody else. So there's some time. I expect them to hire a director of operations, in the coming weeks. And then at that point, they will collectively dictate what the move is. It's a simple question. Are we going to build around Trae Young and give him the max deal and take some of the young talent and try to find pieces to make us a contender? Or a new director may say, you know what, it's time to build from the ground up. We have some young guys. Trae Young has a trade capital value. Let's trade him. Let's build through that. So I think once they hire the director of operations, president of operations, it will go down to the general manager, and then collectively they'll make a decision to, grow with Trae or move on and have a young team that's building for the future.
Do keep in mind, and you know this more than I do, there's an owner who's heavily involved in Atlanta who his, meal ticket a lot for filling up seats and getting the Hawks' attention when they don't get much is still Trae Young. So you wonder how much he'll have a say in what happens with his star player.
But that's what fills the seats even better is winning.
Oh, of course.
And if they feel Trae Young with their young talent is going to be enough to take us to the next level, then they have to make that move. And we've seen stars at multiple sports that you would never think leave a franchise, and they do.
Ask how the Dallas Mavericks are doing with that.
Yeah, but a lot of things. There's a lot of players that you see that happen. Peyton Manning, would he ever leave Indianapolis? Would Tom Brady ever leave New England? I mean, it happens in all sports.
Well, largely, nobody finishes their career in the same place it starts anymore. That seems to be the exception to the rule. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so let me pick your brain as the agent of a player who does not have a problem paying fines. I bring it up because Anthony Edwards is such a talent for the Minnesota Timberwolves, but he's also somebody who's been fined repeatedly, and it just happened again in the first round of the playoffs against the Lakers. He's getting into it with a Laker fan. At one point, he's yelling about his anatomy, a part of it being bigger than the fan, his bank account being much bigger than the fan. Well, he's now been fined $50,000 for the obscene gesture, and it was heard everywhere. But this is also the same guy who got fined $35K for throwing a ball into the stands, $50K for another obscene gesture, profane language on TV, $100,000 fine, criticizing officials in language, $75, profane language during a media session, $25, and another $35 for obscene gesture. You're the agent. You're not the dad, right? You can go, listen, Anthony, what are we doing? How do we get this in check? Guy's going to be emotional and make these decisions, but you as the agent have to try at some point to gotta get him under wraps, right?
Well, you try to, right? With any player, not Anthony specifically, but you're trying always to manage how they handle certain things. The good and bad of it is he's a great player and he's a winner. So at the end of the day, that's more important than anything else as far as the team goes and as far as marketability goes. He also, the downside of this generation, I'll say it across the board, they're making so much money. And now with the NIL, it's happening throughout college, that these fines really become meaningless to them. It's like you and I saying something wrong here on camera, and they say it's going to cost you $1. Okay, here's $1. So there's no true punishment to it. Now, if you were suspended and game checks were taken away and you couldn't play for your team and it affected your win-loss, I think that's where you'd be able to steer it back a little bit more. But until that's collectively bargained in any of these leagues, that's not going to happen. And we all the time are when we see a player say or do something, we hold our breath and hope there's not going to be a fine and hope there's not going to be a suspension. And we try to advise our clients all the time on the things that should be done and how to handle things. But all you can do is advise, and they're going to make their own decisions because, again, you work for them and they are making so much money, especially in Anthony Edwards.
By the way, I work in radio, so $1 would affect me. It really would. One more thing on the NBA, then I want
50 cents.
That's probably fair. I want to talk about Shannon Sharpe, but let's end with the basketball discussion. Cooper Flagg, who's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. We had a discussion on the show a few weeks ago of would he stay, NIL money, and we just said the second contract's going to make it too much for him to stay because he's going to want to get there quicker. So here are the numbers, Hadley, that Cooper Flagg is expected to sign a deal worth $63 million roughly over 4 years as the projected number 1 pick, and then we know what the second contract can be. So NIL dollars at least change the discussion. I don't think it influences a guy staying over going when it's this kind of money.
No, when you're the first pick in the draft, it doesn't. But if you take certain players that are projected to go beyond the first round, early second round. Now you say you stay at this university, we're going to give you $2 million to stay, and you're going to make less than that in the NBA. And if you do well, you can move up in the draft the following year to have a guaranteed contract. So I think when you're talking about guys that are projected to go in the first round, top 10, number 1 overall, no NIL money is going to compete with it. And then you've also got to talk about with a Cooper Flagg, he's right now a marketing gem. I mean, people are going to go to him company-wise. He's going to sign multi-year deals before he plays his first, game in the NBA. If he doesn't pan out, he's going to have a 3 or 4 year deal with a Nike, an Under Armour, Adidas, a Gatorade, whatever it may be. And so he's going to have that cushion to work with as well. So he's going to build off of what he's done so far. There's no reason for him to go back to college. But guys that are teetering, and that's where the NBA Combine comes into play, or guys that have declared for the draft and put their name in to see where they're going to go if they don't like what they're hearing. Before it was like, I don't like what I'm hearing, I've got to go back to college and try to prove myself. Now it's, I got to go back to college, prove what I can do, but I'm getting $2 million, $3 million. So much easier to go back to college when you're on that, borderline.
All right, let's finish up with the most uncomfortable story of the week. Shannon Sharpe, the ESPN talent, the podcast host, the NFL Hall of Famer. He's being sued for $50 million, accused of rape by a 19-year-old, now 21-year-old, who was an OnlyFans model. They had some kind of, he claims, consensual relationship. There's a piece of audio that's now made its way out. So Shannon's coming on the offensive. He's got a video where he's denying everything. He's threatening to sue for defamation. I want you to play agent, but also put your lawyer hat on. His lawyer came out and said that at one point he offered her $10 million to settle before this even became a thing. I don't know why the lawyer would say that. Then the other part of this is, do you advise him to go on the offensive with the video? Because, it's just court of public opinion. Or do you say, let's stay quiet and let's let more facts play out?
Way we handle it, whether it's with Shannon or someone like Shannon or someone that's currently playing, we have a team in place already. We have a publicist. We had on the show before Denise White doing crisis management. So we have all these people in place already that we lean on them for what's the next step to do. How do we handle this PR nightmare? For his lawyer, I haven't seen it, but if he did in fact say we offered to settle, shame on the lawyer for even acknowledging that. But I think that his team of people felt like if I stay silent, it's only one side of the story. I need to at least say that, hey, it was consensual. If you want to pick out videotape or audio tape, that's 10 seconds, 30 seconds of weeks, months, years of a relationship. So it's very misleading. Is it probably more of a money grab, not knowing all the details? Probably. But at the end of the day, they're in a position right now of leverage because he's about to sign potentially, and that timing, listen, this was not just like, when do we do this?
Right.
They knew that there was a chance he could sign this big deal, and before he signs it, we go here, and it could help him settle it quicker because he wants to get that $100 million or however many millions he's going to sign with ESPN or whoever.
Yeah, so there's a deal for $100 million podcast deal on the table, apparently rumored for Shannon Sharpe.
Right. So the timing of this wasn't an accident. It was, hey, if he's about to sign this, now's the time because they want us to stay quiet. And if it is that case and it is a money grab, but there's some truth to it, the problem is for Shannon to say, I'm going to stay true to my morals and I'm going to fight this. It's going to take months and years. It may prohibit him from signing this deal. And for him, it's probably going to be worth settling this. And my money goes on. He ends up settling this for whatever dollar amount because, he put himself in this position. And that's the problem. We try to advise all of our clients, whether they're currently playing or retired, that in today's world, we're in a litigious world. Be smart about the people you surround yourself with because things like this can happen. I
would say if that money's still available and Shannon's not going to snap it up, we're available to take the $100 million.
We'll do it for half.
It was a quarter. Do it for a quarter. That's good negotiating, Hadley. All right, that's going to do it for us. I'll remind you that you can subscribe to Deals and Deadlines by just searching out the name of the show on any podcast platform. New episodes drop each and every Friday. And as I said, you can watch it. And why wouldn't you? Want to watch it on the 680 The Fan YouTube channel. For our producer, Wiley, who was somewhat invested, and for you all, thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time on Deals and Deadlines.